Early in the history of this world, God sorted out a group of people who would be called the Israelites. Through the Israelites, God would eventually send his Son to earth. But as our story begins, the Israelites have been living in Egypt for a long time because there had been a famine in their home country. The Egyptians were very kind to them for many years. In fact, they were all pretty good friends. Life was good. The Israelites were very happy. Their farms were doing well. The sun shone brightly. The Nile River provided plenty of water for crops. They had many children. Even their animals were really healthy. Things went well until a new king came on the scene. In Egypt, the Pharaoh was the name of the king. This Pharaoh didn't like the Egyptian people. He was mean to them. He made them into slaves. He made them work harder than any human beings should ever be asked to work. One day, Pharaoh decided there were too many Israelites in Egypt, so he decided to get rid of all the baby boys. It was a terrible thing to do. One of the Israelite mothers gave birth to a beautiful baby boy, and whenever the Egyptians came near, she just hid him. But as the baby got older and started making more noise, she did something very brave. She painted the outside of a basket with a substance that would keep water from entering. Then she put the baby in the basket, placed that basket into the Nile River. The baby's big sister Miriam hid in the bushes to watch over him, but soon the princess came to bathe, as was her normal daily thing. She noticed the baby in the brush along the edge of the water. She was excited and had her servants bring the baby to her. She loved him. She decided to keep him, even though she could tell he was an Israelite baby. The princess named him Moses because Moses means lifted out of the water. Little Moses grew up in the Pharaoh's home. He had the best education, best clothes, best friends. Besides that, his own birth mother had been hired to be his nanny. Life was good for Moses. Life wasn't good for the Israelites, though. Pharaoh made his servants and guards treat the Israelites worse and worse all the time. Moses finally got angry as he was a young adult about the way the Israelites were being treated. He actually hurt one of the slave masters, fatally. Pharaoh then got angry with Moses. Moses had to run away from him. He ran across the desert to get away from the Pharaoh, the man who had actually raised him as being grandpa. When he got to Midian, he found a friendly group of people at a well. They invited him to live with them and help them raise sheep. One day, as Moses was tending his flock, he noticed a nearby bush was on fire, but it just didn't burn up. It kept on burning. Moses went closer to look at the bush. God called to him from the bush and said, "Moses, Moses?" And Moses said, "Well, here I am." And God said, "Don't come any closer. Take off your sandals, because you are standing on holy ground. I am the God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." Oh, Moses covered his face because he was afraid to look at God. The Lord said, "I have seen the troubles my people have suffered in Egypt. I have heard their cries when the slave masters hurt them. I have come down to save them. I will lead them out of Egypt to a good land. I am sending you to the king to tell him to let my people go." But Moses said, "I am not a great man. How can I get the king to do that?" God said, "I will be with you." Moses was shaking. "No, Lord, not me. Who am I to talk to Pharaoh? Send somebody else." But God replied, "I will be with you, Moses. Here's a sign to show you that I am sending you. Throw that staff on the ground and it will turn into a snake." Moses did as God instructed, and a snake slithered on the ground where the staff had been. Then God had Moses grab the snake's tail, and the snake turned into a staff again. Moses saw God's power. Now Moses was ready to lead God's people. He knew God was going to help him, and he knew God had heard the cries of the Israelites. Moses entered Pharaoh's throne room. He said, "The God of the Hebrews wants his people to worship him in the desert. Let the people go and worship him." Well, Pharaoh wasn't interested in what Moses had to say, even though Moses had been raised as his own grandson. "No," Pharaoh said, "I need the Israelites to stay and work for me. Besides that, I don't know you're a god, and I will not obey him. I am king." So Moses went away and learned from God what he should do next, and that was go back to Pharaoh. "Pharaoh, oh Pharaoh, let my people go." But Pharaoh's heart was hard, and he said no. So God turned all the water in the Nile River to blood. It was the plague of blood. "Yuck," said Pharaoh in disgust. "Pharaoh, oh Pharaoh." "Oh, what do you want?" he yelled. "Let my people go." "No, never," shouted Pharaoh. This time God sent the plague of frogs. "Ooh, this is disgusting," cried Pharaoh. Moses came back time after time, and each time Moses said, "No." And every visit, every no, was followed by a new plague, the plague of gnats. Then came the plague of flies, flies everywhere. The next plague made all of the Egyptian livestock die, but none of the Israelite livestock died. Miraculous! Next was the plague of boils. Ouch! Pharaoh's heart became even more hard and stubborn. He was not going to let the Israelites go. So God sent the plague of hail. He still said no, even though the crops were ruined. Then came the plague of locusts, which destroyed any plants that were left after the hail. Pharaoh got even more wicked and hard-hearted, and throughout all of these plagues, the Israelites remained unharmed, as well as all of their property, unharmed. But Pharaoh said no. Next came darkness all over Egypt, except where the Israelites lived. Still his heart was hard. No was the answer of Pharaoh. The Israelites may not leave. And so, once again, back to Pharaoh, Moses must go. So Moses returned to Pharaoh once again. Pharaoh said to Moses, "Oh no, not you and your little slaves again. Let's see. Let my people go." Now that's an interesting concept, isn't it? No. Exactly what part of no don't you understand? I'm a busy man. I'm running out of patience. I have a kingdom to run. You don't seem to be the brightest light in the sky, so I will say it slowly. No. I really can't deal with you anymore. It's been a rough week. I have a headache. Moses said in a very strong voice, "Pharaoh, here's the deal. At midnight tonight, every firstborn animal and a person in Egypt will die." Well, the Lord told Moses to tell every Israelite family to paint their doorposts with the blood from a perfect lamb. The death angel would then pass over their homes. None of their people or their animals would die. And it happened just as the Lord had said. The death angel passed right over all of the Israelites. But there was weeping and wailing in every Egyptian home that night. But think how many chances had Pharaoh had to let the Israelites go? How many other times had they been punished, but in smaller ways? But this time in his anguish, he said, "Go, get out now." Moses had been told by God to gather everything they could and leave Egypt. They had to hurry, though. They had very little time to get ready. They took what food they could. They took their animals. And about 3 million Israelites started their escape from Egypt. This was a frightening decision. How would they know which way to go? They had no navigation systems. And how could so many people stay together with no cell phones or iPads? God provided just what they needed. He led some of the group by day with a pillar of a cloud. And when those people slept at night, he led the rest of the people through the darkness by a pillar of fire in the sky. Through the desert they walked, some by day, some by night, but always being led by God, either in a cloud or in the fire. There was only one way out of Egypt, though, and how would they cross the Red Sea? Worse than that, though, it seemed. Pharaoh had suddenly changed his mind. He was now sorry that he had lost so many slaves. He wanted them back. So he sent his horsemen to chase and catch the Israelites and bring them back as his slaves. God told Moses to take his stick. When they got to the edge of the Red Sea, hold it up over the sea. And when he did this, God made a strong wind blow. All night, the waters blew apart. That's how God made a road for his people to walk right across the sea. The water stood up like a wall on both sides, and all the people walked on dry ground. With water piled up into huge walls, and the seabed dried up like a well-traveled road, the people moved swiftly and thankfully. Of course, the people had been afraid, but God had used Moses to lead them through the desert and now across the Red Sea. God had used Moses to tell them that God would fight for them, that he would watch over them day and night, that God would be faithful to them. The people walked, and God held the waters back with each step they took. But in the morning, when the Egyptians caught up with them and started to cross the sea, God closed the water, and it covered the king and all of his soldiers. So the millions of Israelites were finally out of Egypt, where their people lived for 400 years. The last years had been filled with slavery of the worst kind, but now they were free. God was now leading them through a dry country called the wilderness. Not much fun a lot of the time. There wasn't much to eat there, and sometimes it was hard to find water. In fact, the first water they found was bitter, so the people started complaining to Moses. But Moses prayed, and God made the water taste good. Then all the people were happy again. The Israelites had brought as much food as they could for the trip, but after all, it started to run out, so they once again became very angry with Moses. They said they wished they were back in slavery. Wah, wah, wah was heard all over the camp. But Moses trusted God, and God told Moses he would send them both bread and meat. And so after that, God sent manna every morning, well, except for the Sabbath, because they were to gather a double day's worth the day before. Manna was little round pieces of food that tasted kind of like cookies made with honey. It was called manna because that means, what is it? That was the first question the Israelites asked when they saw it. In the evening, God also sent large flocks of birds called quails. Well, there were so many that the people could easily catch them. Quails are very good to eat. Moses praised God, and the people were very happy. And now they loved Moses. And so it went. The Israelites loved Moses and trusted God when life was easy, but they griped and complained when life was hard. God led the people to Mount Sinai. On the morning of the third day there, all the people heard a trumpet. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da. There was thunder. There was lightning sizzling. A cloud covered the mountain, and God told Moses to come up to the top of the mountain to meet him. Moses was on the mountain with God for a long time, and God took his own finger and wrote down 10 instructions for how his people should live in a sinful world. Moses came down from the mountain carrying the rules to govern the Israelites and to govern the hearts of his children for the rest of earth's history. 1. You shall have no other gods before me. 2. You shall not make anything an idol in your life. 3. You shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God. 4. Keep one day of the week to rest and keep it holy. 5. Show respect to your father and mother. 6. Do not murder. 7. Husbands and wives must be faithful to each other. 8. Do not steal. 9. Do not lie about people. And 10. Be happy with what you have and don't resent what others have. Yes, it was Moses who led the multitude of Israelites through the wilderness and around Mount Sinai and in the desert for 40 years while God prepared their hearts to enter the land God had promised them. And yes, they moaned and groaned and often disobeyed. But God kept his promise to Moses and to his people, because to them was to be born in centuries to come God's only Son, the Savior who would give his life as a sacrifice for all the people who would trust in him to rescue them from the punishment of their sins. Moses had trusted in God to rescue his people so they could set the stage for this Savior. Moses' story is really God's story because Moses let himself become a man of action for God and his glory.